Hello. See this Cyclopean tower? It's called a torre or castelo and is part of a network of about 20 such buildings that are still to be found in the south side of the island of Corsica, featuring a type of Cyclopean construction that, upon closer inspection, will reveal a deep divide that echoes millennia old tensions over this beautiful island. Corsica is a misleading sleepy place that is permanently on the brink of either being absorbed into oblivion or rebelling with unexpected ferocity. That is somewhat similar to the ancient Cyclopean builders, who are both ignored by academics and portrayed as terrifying angry monsters by ancient writers. Such coincidences are not unprovoked, as we'll see moving on, allowing us to further understand the character and fate of the lost and nearly forgotten Cyclopean builders. The island of Corsica is famed for the short temper of its inhabitants, capable of wreaking havoc on a continental scale if their nap time is disturbed. However, upon contact, this idea could not seem to be further away from the truth. The island is idyllic, and the people there are generally warm and nice, nothing like the unpleasant Parisienne. The gentle nature of the island is best illustrated by the Oriu, that are some little hobbit houses built on rock cavities made by salt erosion. The Oriu are relatively young, 100 years or so, and were built and used by shepherds, so nothing fancy, but combined with the striking landscape, they make up for the cutest cuddly little doll houses we can think of. With all that, one wonders what sort of unforgiving tension had to be brewing under the surface for that same island to be known not by the fairy tale Oriu houses, but as the home of not only Napoleon, but also explosive cheese, bloody vendettas, and the last active independence guerrilla in Europe. In my view, it is because no one tried to properly understand the Corsican and their Cyclopean tragedy, but rather would discard them under the influence of whatever neighbor was feeling more expansive at the time, starting from the earliest written sources like Ptolemy, claiming the island was inhabited by the Corsi, from whom the island name is derived, a tribe of Ligurian origin from up north that occupied the whole island plus a bit of Sicily just before the Romans arrived. But that is not the real backstory, as we'll see. First things first, let's start with the big old rocks, the megaliths. Those are the dolmens and menhirs to be found all over Corsica, and that's nothing special to begin with. One can find those big boys all over Europe. They are the earliest trace of a connected culture in the continent and even beyond. Since at least the 4th millennium BC, most of Europe, shared a single cultural background, and those people were building majestic stone structures to prove it. However, there are always local variances to consider. And for that, we notice something unique not about the dolmens that are quite bland, but in the menhirs. These are not the average dull standing stones. They are sharp, have some character and strength. They look undisturbed, yet ready for action. Often, the Corsican menhirs are parading in units or rows, to this day better coordinated than a Belgian battalion. And they are not that small either. Just the site of Pelagio has some 250 stones alone. That's high level concentrations. The menhirs in Corsica have drawn into them the markings of a proud and combative culture. Quite literally, I mean figuratively, with carvings of armor and sword that evoke a Cyclopean connection. The helmets are similar to those used by the Chardin when they were invading Egypt during the Bronze Age collapse, and the swords are of Mycenaean style. Cyclopean or not, such carvings are quite rare in menhirs, not only in mainland Europe, where menhirs are just flat standing stones, but also in Corsica, with only a few of them have ever been harmed. Consequently, if most of the menhirs in the alignments are just plain stones and only a few of them have been decorated, this suggests two phases for the culture. One that was lining up tall stones, similar to the ones we can find in Carnac, in northern France, and then the other that would take the previous work one step further with the carvings. Personally, I suspect the second group did that by modifying existing plain menhirs and not by erecting new ones. Sometime after the dolmens and the menhirs, and likely at the same time those were being modified into standing soldier statues, we enter the Cyclopean phase, with the construction of what are now called torre or castedu, local variations of Latin words for tower and castle, and all-round cliché titles for any Cyclopean construction. Like with so many other Cyclopean towers, there's no way to look at this structure's location and figure out a reasonable reason to build them. The random placements in different types of settings make the castedo improper for defense, also bad for inhabitation, and useless at controlling traffic. Basically, they are like cats. We aren't sure what they are good for, but they can be cute. These scattered castedu, of which there are left under 20 of them, are circular structures with concentric dry stone walls, meaning with blocks of irregular shapes, without mortar to glue the stones, but of varied skill set, ranging from the basic crumble of rocks to some big blocks or even to a few fine-fitted ones. It's a stretch to call them polygonal, because none of the surviving castedu has fit-to-purpose irregular stones, as we see in the more interesting Cyclopean sites elsewhere. Also, it is a stretch to call them Cyclopean in the sense of being built by mythical giants or with massive boulders. A few stones are large enough to be troublesome, but not nearly worthy of giants. However, they are Cyclopean in my preferred application of the word, as part of that ancient lost culture that once occupied all of southern Europe and is recognizable by more than one particular building technique. The Cyclopean nature of the castedu is revealed by the language, both via direct sources with Seneca the Younger, who had been exiled in the island and hated it, revealing that people in the interior hills spoke an Iberian language, but also indirectly via the Nuragi in Sardinia, also using a familiar to the Iberian language, as spoken by the Cyclopean builders from Spain to Georgia, thus making a strong connection with all those other regions with a knack for building Cyclopean towers, and ultimately proving the Cyclopean builders were a real culture. You'd be excused to think of Corsica as just one island, and in a lot of senses it is, geographically at least. But that's not the whole story. For several purposes, and in particular during Cyclopean times, this place was divided in two areas or regions, clearly separated not by water but by mountains. Corsica is crossed in half by a steep mountain range with plenty of snow during winter time. That made traveling by sea much easier than by land. And since the locals were already on a boat, it meant Sardinia was just as accessible from the south of Corsica as the north side of the island. Then it is also interesting to note that all the Torrean Castedu are located exclusively on the south half of the island, implying that during the Cyclopean times, this south part was culturally united with Sardinia and separated from the north. Now, you may wonder, what was going on the north side? Well, nothing good, I suspect. They have menhirs and dolmens, although only of the plain type, and not of the carved ones with helmets and swords. And also, they are lacking Cyclopean constructions up north. This means that from the time it took to go from the megalithic epoch into the Cyclopean era, 1 or 2,000 years later, the island was left divided in two, with either an invasion from the south bringing in the Cyclopean builders or from the north exterminating them. It was like this. Either the Cyclopeans are the inheritors of the megalithic culture, then it means the invasion was coming from the north, since the island was already megalithic and only half of it became Cyclopean. Or, alternatively, if the megalithic builders are unrelated to the Cyclopean ones, then south was the path taken to bring the Cyclopean culture in. Ultimately, answering this simple question will give us a shot at deciphering the origin and destiny of the Cyclops. But for that, we'll have to look around outside of the island. Corsica and Sardinia are separated by little more than 10 kilometers of water and some political shenanigans. Since forever, the destiny of these two jewels has been tied together, and this could not be more evident than during the Torrean phase, when all the Cyclopean works have been built in the islands, both the islands. In Sardinia, this period is called Nuragic and runs from 1800 BC to the arrival of the Romans in 300 BC, a time during which about 9,000 special towers were built, leaving no doubt about the commitment of people living in the island to their special constructions. In Corsica, the Castedu had been dated to about the same period as the Nuragic, the Late Bronze Age. However, further investigations with the benefit of carbon-14 dating, the discovery of tools made with Sardinian obsidian, and common sense managed to uncover that the Torrean had their origin 1,000 years earlier, thus limiting the likelihood of the Cyclopean constructions in Corsica being an import from Sardinia. Quite the contrary, the Corsican Castedu are, if not older, at least contemporaneous to the earliest stone constructions in Sardinia, called the Proto-Nuragic, indicating that whatever prevented the northern side of the island to have Cyclopean walls was not coming from Sardinia and had happened in the beginning of the Bronze Age, not in the end. Surely no clear present danger could have come from the west. The seas on that side are open and wide, too much for a broad scale invasion, but enough for peaceful interactions, and there was plenty of those since the Paleolithic. Directly west of Corsica, we find the Balearic Islands that have their own brand of Bronze Age Cyclopean construction, called the Talayot. Despite some misjudgments by academics, the Talayot are closely related to the Nuraghe and Torrean, and we can even say they are an improved version with some sophisticated stonework present in the Balearic Islands being superior in terms of skill to what is to be found in Corsica. The close relationship between the Talayot and the Torrean, between Menorca and Corsica, is undisputed, with the Cyclopean connection going as far as western Iberia, with likely the most pressing example of this connection being that a third of the Sardinia, by the time of the Romans arrived, was inhabited by people called the Balari. And that's a striking similar name to the Balearic, living in the islands to the west. For those speaking Romance languages, note that there are no whales in the Mediterranean Sea, so the name Balearic or Balearic was not due to fat shaming, but just another way of saying Cyclopean, like Iberian or Pelasgian. Corsica is in a tough spot. Not only it has to deal with the French up north when they would likely prefer to bond with the Sardinian to the south. The easiest path from the mainland into the island is actually coming from the west, via the island of Elba, that more than once functioned as the escape route for the Corsican. You know what I'm talking about. The small island of Elba has menhirs, but that much we should be used by now, since everywhere in Europe has such standing stones. It's the existence or not of Cyclopean walls that could be revealing. Unfortunately, there are no proper Cyclopean walls in Elba, but that is overcompensated with the number and quality of these polygonal wonders in mainland Italy, featuring some of the most awesome examples of the work, such as the cases of Orbetello or Cosa nearby. Those walls are too good for our sake, to be honest. The Cyclopean works in mainland Italy are not the same scope and quality as the Torrean in Corsica. It's a completely different style with massive boulders and sharp angles, thus leading us to conclude the event that separated north from south in Corsica did not have its roots in the Etruscan lands. There's this line around 43 degrees north, with most of the Cyclopean walls to be found south of it. It's quite an interesting curiosity, and it would be super nice if the separation between the divergent north and south parts in the island of Corsica would match that 43-degree parallel, but not. The northern half of the island is still south enough to have Cyclopean walls. Furthermore, there are enough exceptions to this rule. Two such exceptions are the Castellieri in Istria and the Castellaras in the Alps Maritime, both sharing similar names and other quirks, enough to be worth some videos about them on their own, something that I'll do if you keep pushing me to continue. Moving on, for the sake of Corsica and its Cyclopean-less northern half, the bad news seemed to have come from the north, from France, as most Corsicans would have immediately guessed. How could this be? Well, it's like this. The Castellara are themselves victims of occupation by non-stone building brutes. In the south of France, there are but a handful of rough Cyclopean construction, all in a tiny small area within the overrated Blue Coast that was later occupied by Celts, with the Romans calling the whole place Transalpine Gaul. We will not solve the drama of the Castellara and their likely builders, the Ligurian, not this time. But one look at the map is enough to let us know what was cooking back then. Some dark force came in from the north and eliminated all the Cyclopean builders from this side of the world, leaving only two small pockets, the Castellara in that area in the Alps and the Torrean back in the south of Corsica. We don't know who the invaders were, since it was nearly 1,000 years before the Gauls and the Romans and the first written accounts, but we do know that the Corsican never forgave that intrusion. Here's the thing, Corsicans are a proud people that can hold a grudge for a long time. And to this day, they haven't come to terms with the divisions in the island, imposed by their neighbors from the north during Cyclopean times. And I won't blame them, because that invasion deprived Corsica of the best works ever done by the Cyclopean cultures they were closely related to. This damage was made first by occupying the northern half of the island, and secondly by causing sufficient stress for the Castello to remain underdeveloped, with only a few being built instead of the thousands in nearby Sardinia, and also with inferior quality stonework compared to the ones in mainland Italy or the Balearic Islands. The original inhabitants of Corsica were a true part of the ancient lost Cyclopean culture, the one stretching from Lusitania to Georgia. But then the island, welcoming as it is, failed to protect them from the upcoming brutes invading from the north, and thus limited the scope of the Cyclopean work to a few castelli. For a true Corsican, there cannot be a worse insult than saying their island got it worse than anywhere else. But that much is what the ancient people were saying of the next Cyclopean site, even calling it the Garden of Eden, as we'll see. That's it for today. Hope you liked it. See you in the comments.